The critics have suggested that Hans Farm's project is something of a land grab, nothing more than a land grab, and you have said that that is not what it's about. Your website mentions green jobs, alleviating the food desert problem in Detroit, and generally cleaning up the city. Are you willing to commit to putting all the land that you own into a community land trust? That's one question. And
why don't we handle that one, since there were like 6 in there?
Well, there were a few, and I'm trying to combine them. So you want to address that one first?
Yeah, one is, it is definitely a land grab. You can't farm without land. So, it's not an intellect, so I can't really, it's one of these, do you beat your wife still? And it's like, well, I never did, but it's sort of, you can't farm without land, so I really can't ever, it's sort of one of those great tricky questions in the sense that...
Question, you don't need to own the land to farm it.
Well, that's what makes it different.
Detroit is in a unique position because we have almost a third of the geographic footprint of the city, which is vacant land. And so we like to see much more robust use of that land for agricultural production and as an economic driver for the city of Detroit. We have significant problems with the approach that the Hans Farm, or what is now being called Hans Woodlands, is taking.
We have a fundamental vision that is different. The money goes back to him. The question is, how much viability does that provide for a neighborhood?
And so we're very concerned about the equitable distribution of publicly owned land in the city of Detroit. That the average Detroiter should have access to land in the same way that John Hans has access to land. The average Detroiter should have a process which is not convoluted, where that person doesn't have to go through a maze to buy the vacant lot next to their house, the vacant lot across the street.
The city council really kind of put the community and the city as a whole into this really intense conflict.
The city has given favor to those who have large amounts of money, such as John Hans. So we're concerned about that.
And Detroit is up for grabs right now. This is a real battle. This is no less than a battle in the Old West. And, you know, like if they had gunslingers then, they have robber barons now.
I can only speak for myself that everyday things I believe to be true are not. And everyday things that I didn't know, I discovered. And I see as I walk through this process that if you're not open to self-discovery, if you're not open to tinkering and trial and error, if you're not open to having new information be discovered or bestowed upon you each day, this isn't going to work.
The residents in and around our development area, we are the biggest investment that they've seen in decades. We're the biggest in terms of dollars, the biggest in terms of footprint, and we're the biggest in terms of impact. How you doing? Is it okay? Well, how many are you taking?
We sure did, and he filed a restraining order. Right. Alright, so that is the question.
That's all. Because we cleared this, we're going to plant trees here this fall. We're going to use these to mulch our trees. So if you're taking 5 or 6 barrels, that's fine. Beyond that, I wouldn't approve it, okay? So 6, you got my word? I got your word on that? 6? Okay. He's only taking a little bit. He's going to take 5 or 6 garbage cans, so I don't mind that. I was born in Detroit, on the east side. In Detroit, we have west side and east side, so it becomes part of your identity. And all through your life, when you introduce yourself, if you say you're from Detroit, people immediately ask,
East Side or West Side. So I'm an East Sider, and that happens to be where Hans Farms is located, on the east side of Detroit. I had this dream of somehow taking what I had learned in life and using it to help my hometown. I think a lot of people have that dream. Well, Detroit had a lot of urban gardens, and they're great because of Detroit's landscape and all the vacant land that has no purpose and there's no budget to maintain it. What Detroit really needed was a large-scale farm. And a farm in Detroit would be more than just a production center. It becomes a platform for tourism and education, for economic development, and also for healing some of the fractures in our community. I think we're best defined by our broken relationships. So I had this vision for a large farm in the city, but I didn't know anybody who really could launch a farm like that. One day, my boss from Michigan State University called me up and said, Mike, you help people write business plans for agricultural businesses. There's a successful businessman in Detroit, and he's interested in trying to start a large farm. Do you think you could help him? And I laughed. I said, sure, it sounds like what I was looking for.
I have this problem that I've lived here for 20 years, and I tell myself every year it's going to get better. And it does. But each year I lie to myself, like as a New Year resolution. This is the year. It's going to get better. And probably about 5 years ago, I was driving to work. I drive out of the city where most people drive into the city. So I'm doing my morning drive, and I'm stopped at a stoplight, and I'm just sort of daydreaming, looking around, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. And it's not getting better. And I don't see how it's going to get better. And then I made the dreaded mistake that only the human mind can do. I said, what's someone going to do about this? And then I went to the next light, and then it dawned on me, well, that somebody might be you. Maybe you need to do something about this. One of the issues in Detroit that I found was because we saw the problem as so large that all the solutions had to be big and Big Bang theory to cure the issue that we faced in Detroit. When in reality, we didn't have the resources for a Big Bang theory. But if you have a big problem, you gotta have a big answer. And we didn't have the resources for that here in Detroit. So as I kept driving, I started thinking, okay, well, what's doable? I lived 30 miles outside of Detroit when I grew up. I lived in this farm area. It was apple orchards. People seemed to enjoy that. I thought to myself, if we could just clean up the debris, clean up the blight, just get it down to the barren ground. People seem to enjoy living around a farm. People seem to enjoy that open space. Why wouldn't we just do that? Because once we get down to the ground, we don't have to do a big, crazier idea. Just let time be our friend instead of our enemy. And so I thought, well, in economic terms, what's really our issue here in Detroit? And I found that our issue was we didn't have any scarcity. So I thought, I got this farm idea. With that farm, create scarcity. Think of all the areas in the United States where farms take large tracts of land and no one thinks of them in a negative way because they're out of circulation. And they help stabilize and they help create value for those residents in those areas. So I thought, that's what we need to do.
The major problem that we have is that we are concerned about large amounts of land being amassed in the hands of single individuals, particularly wealthy white men. And we think that part of the imbalance we see in the world today has to do with large amounts of wealth being amassed by wealthy white men.
This is not your neighborhood. You want to come over into our neighborhood and plant trees in your neighborhood.
It became very apparent that it was more about real estate than it was about feeding people and more about what Mr. Hance referred to as scarcity and creating that scarcity.
At one time, Detroit had the largest amount of individual home ownership of the working class in the country, if not in the world, but certainly in this country. That is being diminished, not only by Hans Farms, but by others who are getting these large, huge tracts of land to say, we're going to build apple orchards or we're going to build whatever the case may be.
It was very upsetting that he would use food and feeding people as the means to do that. And for me, it smacked of a lot of the same kind of processes used globally by food producers that are purchasing large areas of land to grow food on. And and what's happening is the ownership, they're gaining ownership of that land and turning it into property basically from whatever it was before.
This land that we're talking about was private sector land to begin with, that was then confiscated through excessive taxation. Then what we're talking about is reverting it back to private sector. We're not talking about parks that were parks and let's move them to the private sector.
Some were just lots, some were vacant and abandoned homes, but nobody was taking care of them. Whether they were privately owned or owned by the city, state, or county, nobody was taking care of this property the way they should have been or the way the residents in that area deserved. Blight has multiple impacts on children. It puts them at risk for violence because of vacant structures that they're going past to and from, and it's the perfect place for a predator to dwell. Imagine the impact it has when you're walking past destruction every single day in your neighborhood, and what that says to you as a child about your worth and the worth of your community when nobody's doing anything about it.
I think it negatively impacts your lives because I think you are a part of your environment. And if you come outside your environment and all you're seeing is a bunch of trees and bushes and garbage, it's depressing.
Blight and the psychology of a neighborhood are intertwined. Blight is ugly. Blight creates the perception that nobody cares. Blight creates the perception that there's no value. And that affects us most, especially the people living amidst all that blight. And because value is so related to perception and a desire to reinvest is so related to that perception, it ends up having a debilitating effect on an entire neighborhood. And it's all related, really, to the psychology of people who live and try to do business.
I mean, think about it. Anything that you have to be close to that's not healthy affects your psyche, right? Young people who go to school, for instance, in that community, who walk past abandoned homes and burned out houses and overgrowth where there might be possums and raccoons and dogs and vermin, you begin to actually think that that's normal, that that's okay. And then you go somewhere else to visit maybe, and you start saying, well, wait a minute, why does where I live look like this? And why does where they live look like that? And what's the difference and why? It affects your psyche, it affects your sense of self-worth, it affects your self-esteem. It certainly affects your housing values, and it just doesn't make you feel good.
The blight narrative just really pisses me off. I mean, that's so one man's blight is another man's life, right? And that's one of those things. It's just like where do you define blight?
The more the blight, the less the activity, the fewer the people. The fewer the people, the higher the crime, and the less safety. The reverse of that is that clearing the blight makes people feel better. And when people feel better, they want to invest. They want to come outside. They want to generate activity in the neighborhood. And that, in turn, can have a positive impact on perception and reality of safety. So we tend to underestimate the implications and the power of blight and blight fighting.
That's great that John Hance wants to take care of blight, but the problem with the word blight is typically I equate blight with black. That's the way that things seem to happen. And a lot of the pieces of the city that they're removing are pieces that the black community has been engaged with. A lot of the structures of democracy that have been removed are black power structure ideas that may be very different from the uber capitalist way of thinking that is presented now, but were very powerful and protected the community here. And that's one of the things that I get to experience when I go into planning and development and try to get something done is, there is a power structure existent within City Hall that respects the black power structure that was here for decades. And there's a new power structure that's moving into that space that's trying to weed out a lot of it so that things can become streamlined. The reason why those structures existed in City Hall was to protect community, because the folks here were looking out for their brothers and sisters, and they were setting up systems to protect them, to make sure that they weren't doing things like kicking people out, to make sure that they weren't moving them down. That's what that corruption was about community. And the white power structure, in order to break that, has had to break all of these laws, go completely unconstitutional with emergency management, and make all these deals with billionaires giving away shit so that they can move people on. I mean, that's why blight pisses me off.
I've been living in this neighborhood like all my life. My mom been right here like 48 years. I've been living on this street, 53 years. Yeah, this street right here. I never moved off the street. I moved down the street, we lived down the street, but we moved here. This house is on sale. They were supposed to be buying projects over here and building, certain stuff, and it was buying up the home. So we moved here. My mom bought this house. Ever since, I've been right here, man. Ain't been nowhere. We had a corner, had a bar down there, got a store down here. We had a bakery right here, food hall, barbecue shop. We had all kind of, activities going on in right here. Had a police station way down there, but police station just right here. We didn't have to go that far. So I'm saying, and they had a great big old supermarket called the A&P. It was right there, just like the Food Express over there. There's one they called the A&P. That burned down in, 67 riot.
On July 23rd, 1967, Detroit was hit by a riot. We said it couldn't happen, but it did, and the nation was shocked. This is the story of that riot, which left 43 dead, thousands injured, and the city in flames.
I remember as a kid, like it was yesterday, my mom was working, my dad was working, a neighbor came in telling me to close up all the curtains and everything, don't come out of the house, that it was a riot. And I remember, what is a riot, and my mom made it home from work, and then as you looked at television, you heard what was going on. And I mean, it was right here in the neighborhood. And to hear gunshots all night long, and to see people on top of the roof shooting at police officers, shooting at fire trucks, and seeing, Mack Avenue burn down.
Fighting one war now is Vietnam, we'll lose. So, why should we come back here and fight a war among ourselves?
People looting and all of that, that was the worst that I've ever seen. Soldiers right on the corner of Mack as a kid, that was the worst.
I was home, wasn't it?
Yes, the first night home.
And then the aftermath, everything, that they seemed to be arguing or promoting, you tore up your own neighborhood. And to this day, they, the people in the neighborhood are still paying for what happened in the riot because it was never rebuilt. They burned down their own stores, burned down everything that we had right on Mack Avenue, and over the years, it was never built back up. So it's like, you sit in your own mess that you created.
It was empty now because we had parents who left houses to their kids.